Is it possible to make a jack-o'-lantern, pumpkin pie, and pumpkin bread out of one pumpkin? I wanted to find out. The US grows just under 2 billion pumpkins each year, many of which do not get eaten and go to landfill. They're usually not eaten because they're carved into jack-o'-lanterns and then they spoil quickly. So I wanted to see if I could do both. Eat as much of the pumpkin as possible, but still have enough to carve something of a jack-o'-lantern. I started by cutting the pumpkin, and as you can see, it's not perfectly in half. The stem is still going to be on one side, and that's the side I'm going to use for the jack-o'-lantern. The slightly smaller chunk I'm going to use for baking. And yes, kids, do not try this at home. If I still lived at home, I would have asked my dad to do this. No, it really wasn't that bad, as long as you're careful, and afterwards, I felt pretty strong. I don't need no man to carve my pumpkin. Next, I scooped out the inside, which was a little bit time-consuming, but it gave my arms a good workout. Then I cut the pumpkin into 3 to 4 inch wedges and then baked them at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour until soft. While the wedges baked, I separated the seeds from the guts, and I probably should have used 3 bowls for this, but in a pinch I ended up just using the other half of pumpkin to hold the guts in. Then I greased 2 loaf pans with Miyoko's vegan butter, but you can use whatever you want. And then I blended the pumpkin guts in a Ninja Bullet, but I probably should have used a food processor for this because I kept having to shake the guts down toward the blade. I poured that into a medium bowl, and then in a separate bowl, I added flour, sugar, cinnamon, baking soda, nutmeg, and salt, which I did not video, and I am sorry. Then I mix that together and mash up 2 ripe bananas. I mix that into the pumpkin guts. And then I mix in 1 cup of applesauce, and I'm using unsweetened applesauce. Then I add 1 cup of oil. I used avocado oil, and as you can see, I initially only used half a cup because avocado oil is expensive. However, after mixing it together, I realized that I really needed that other half cup of oil. So I tried to find the canola oil, but I couldn't, and I was recording, so I just used another half cup of avocado oil. But next time I will probably use canola oil. Also, I should have incorporated the flour mixture in stages instead of just dumping the puree into the flour, but that's okay, we're just learning together in a safe space. And this is where I add the other half cup of avocado oil. But guess what? It still came out really good, so who cares? So then I mixed it all up until it was nice and creamy and then poured it evenly into the 2 prepared loaf pans. Then bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. Meanwhile, the pumpkin wedges were done. But I had to move on to the jack-o'-lantern, so I popped them into the fridge to work on them tomorrow. And remember how I said that I didn't need a man to carve my pumpkin? Well, Evo ended up carving my pumpkin so that I could set up the next recipe. And yeah, he's using a Sharpie because we still have them from forever ago. And we propped the pumpkin up against a stone, and in the dark you couldn't even really tell that it was cut in half.
It's like Zico.
Nico.
And because cutting the pumpkin gave it kind of a flat surface to work on, it was actually a lot easier to carve, even though we both really aren't very good at it. And when we came back inside, the pumpkin bread was done. Woo! What a whirlwind! But it was delicious. And we had an extra loaf to give away to a friend. The next morning, I gave the pumpkin seeds a rinse and then let them dry on a dish towel. Then, on a parchment paper-lined baking sheet, I layered the pumpkin seeds in an even layer and then sprinkled them with a little avocado oil, salt, and my own habanero powder. But you can use whatever you want, and you don't have to say it so weird. You can just say habanero. Now bake the pumpkin seeds at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 12 minutes until they're nice and toasty, and that's it. Easy. Okay, last recipe. We are almost there. Woo! Alright, first we're going to make a simple pie dough using Miyoko's vegan butter and flour. Since the butter was salted already, I didn't bother adding any more salt and it was still very flavorful. So just process the 2 ingredients until it forms, well, a dough. And then dump it onto a cutting board lined with either parchment or wax paper and shape it into a ball. Flour the top of the dough and then roll it into a circle with a rolling pin. You want it to be about an inch wider than the pan you intend to use. And if you rotate the cutting board about 90 degrees every roll or so, it's going to help prevent the cracking around the edges. Then place the pie pan in the center of the dough and carefully but quickly flip it over. It's not a pretty process, but if you work the sides down and seal the cracks with your fingers, it works. And it's going to be covered in pie filling soon anyway, so it's fine. Now I took the wedges out of the fridge and cut off the skin. Then I added the pumpkin to a food processor. It ended up being about 2 cups of pumpkin. Then to help it blend a little bit, I added 1 cup of the coconut milk, which had been in the refrigerator, so it was pretty solid. I processed it until it was creamy, wiping down the edges a couple times. Then I added sugar, maple syrup, cornstarch, salt, cinnamon, pumpkin spice, and a little vanilla extract. Then I blended it again. Once nice and creamy, I poured it into our prepared pie shell. And then baked it for 1 hour at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And out of all the recipes we've made today, nothing will be going to landfill and only 1 can will be going to recycling. I hope you enjoyed this episode and have a happy Halloween. Bye!